Hello, Simone. I'm excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be going deeper down a rabbit hole that I have pulled on in the past, but I was called back to it by an episode I watched of the rapidly declining in viewers, Short Fat Otaku. I think we now do better than him in terms of view count by probably like 20%.
That's insane.
Which is pretty exciting because I used to really like him and his videos, and he sort of got... He actually represents a wider phenomenon that I wanted to grab onto on this topic, because in his recent video, he was critical of Leaflet's debate performance, whereas almost everyone else says that she won dramatically. I even had this moment where he's like, I think she lost the trans debate she was having. And I was like, to go to an AI and be like, is it general? What's the general consensus on who won this debate? And it's like overwhelmingly Leaflet. And then it went through all of the reasons it was overwhelmingly Leaflet. So I was like, okay, just checking. I'm not crazy.
Yeah, just so to even override your bias still.
But he said one thing that really got under my skin at the beginning, because a trans person was saying to somebody who is in this debate that was happening on X, we were here before you and we will be here after you. And then his response that went viral was like, this is true. And he then says, trans people have been reported in human history since, across cultures, since the beginning of time. And this is factually not true. And I actually don't even really blame Short Fat Otaku for not knowing this, because
he's not a historian.
Well, it's something that's not widely known and yet is claimed with a lot of confidence by the trans community. And if you don't double check, because you'll be broadly aware, like if you're aware of history, you will be aware that throughout human history and a lot of different cultural contexts where people will take on alternate gender roles, where sometimes people cross-dress in history, where people would act like a man or a female at different points in history.
The fall of Rome. Joe Rogan had this to say on his podcast.
Fascinating that at the end of empires, they get really concerned with gender and hermaphrodites.
The Roman femboy, fully grown and willing to take on the role of a common Roman woman. Even the emperor himself donned girly outfits, mascara, and held many chamber parties. The Roman Senate began having debates to determine if, quote, being with a femboy was a totally gay thing after all.
And so you take that and you then just are like, yeah, of course, I've heard like 3 or 4 instances of that happening in history that I can just think of off the top of my head. But that's not what the modern trans movement is. And even the core complaint of the modern trans movement is gender dysphoria. This really, really intense discomfort with your birth gender, to the extent that you may want to unalive yourself, right? Like you cannot live a mentally healthy life as your birth gender. It is something that is constantly eating at you if you don't transition. This phenomenon literally nowhere in history before the year 1920. And you may want to say, well, Malcolm, that's pretty nitpicky. So you're saying that there have been alternate gender presentation throughout history, but there's never been dysphoria recorded in history. Why does that matter? Right? And it's like, well, if it turns out that dysphoria is a modern cultural phenomenon, if dysphoria is not actually part of the human condition, then most trans arguments immediately fall apart. The idea of, I can't be mentally healthy without doing this because of what? Because of the distress I feel when I'm displaying my birth gender. If you say, well, that distress is a cultural artifact and we're probably better off removing the cultural artifact than attempting to address it through major surgery, that falls apart. And if you can say, well, if the people in Historia, lived as other genders but didn't feel dysphoria, then why'd they do it? And it's like, well, we actually have a very good record. Most of the time it was either like a woman wanted to live as a father in like a church and like this sort of lifestyle, or did she wanted to fight in a war and women were allowed to fight in wars during that period, or she wanted to pursue a gay relationship and women weren't allowed to pursue gay relationships in that period, or with guys, it's often they were cross-dressers. Cross-dressing is something we see recorded throughout history. Even today, to conflate somebody who is a cross-dresser with a trans person is extremely offensive to both the trans community and the community of cross-dressers. They are not the same thing. Wanting to dress up and talk like a woman sometimes is not the same thing as being trans. So if you say, oh, well, in history we have cross-dressers but no trans people, that's a significantly different thing that removes most of the motivation for like why we need to gender someone correctly. Gender dysphoria. Why do I need to use that restroom? Gender dysphoria. Why do I need to be on the sports team? Gender dysphoria. But if we're looking to history and all we have is sometimes I like cross-dressing, then it's why do I have to play on the girls' sports team? Because I like cross-dressing. It's like, oh, no, that's stupid. No, we can't let you on the sports team just because you like cross-dressing. If gender dysphoria is a cultural artifact, that is the center stone that the entire trans community relies on to demand they, one, be seen as their preferred gender, and two, gain access to safe spaces that would otherwise be referred for people who were born that gender. And also, just to head this off at the beginning of this, we do not think that they are faking feeling gender dysphoria or the severity of the gender dysphoria they feel. We suspect, with a lot of evidence that we've gone over in other episodes, that gender dysphoria is very similar to other forms of body dysphoria, which are associated with culture-bound illnesses. These are psychological conditions that only happen within certain cultures, within certain periods of history, and people are unable to catch unless they are aware of them, with the most famous being anorexia. And again, you can see a lot of similarities. Age of onset around puberty, gender distribution, more girls than guys, key characteristics, hits autists more than the general population, associated with intense body dysmorphia. And Simone, as somebody who went through that, and we're going to see this throughout this episode, can really empathize with how real this feels. But if it is a culture-bound illness, the way that we need to address it is entirely different than the way our society is addressing it right now, if we actually care about the people who are suffering from it. And there are two maybe cases, but both of them are really bad. We'll go into them in a bit, just to briefly touch on them. One is a Jewish rabbi from 600 years ago who wrote a poem
rabbi?
about, like, wouldn't it have been better to be born a woman? And we'll go through the poem and everything like this. And just to sort of give away the thing there, it's that poem is considered within Jewish thought for 600 years. Up until the year 2000, not a single scholar, it's a very famous poem, thought that it wasn't satirical. In fact, it was considered almost prototypical or an excellent example often used of Jewish humor from that period. So not a single scholar or rabbi for 600 years thought it was anything other than a joke.
Well, even if it wasn't a joke, though, I don't think that could even necessarily be seen as gender
It was a joke.
dysphoria.
It was written as a joke. It's satire.
No, but even if it wasn't, as someone could just be like, well, practically, I'd rather be born a woman, especially during a time of war. If they're like, I'd rather not die in a war.
That's not what the poem was. It wasn't like that. It was a joke. It was written in a book of jokes. Okay. The other things in this book were mostly jokes.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yes,
Oh my
it
gosh.
was satire. It's not like you could interpret this in various ways. It's very clear what was intended by it. The only other example we have in history is potentially Elagabalus, a Roman emperor who, based on one account, asked doctors if he could have a vagina sewn onto him to become a woman, and he would dress up like women. The problem is that this one account was extremely hostile to him, and all historians always, like, basically, if you go back and you read the historian literature, and we'll go into this a bit deeper, I just want to set this up to begin with, they agree, and then this is the academic consensus, that a lot of this was slanders made up about him of people who didn't like him. And even if you do bite the bullet on Elagabalus, you are basically saying, I could just go into this a little bit. He's like one of the people in human history. He would do things like cut off people's members and then feed them to like snakes and birds and stuff like that as part of a religious ritual he made up. He would give people government positions based on the size of their members. He was the one who was famous before the gladiatorial games, releasing snakes on the crowd just to watch them freak out. He liked to, as a hobby, throw gold at crowds so people would trample each other. At one point, he dropped so many flower petals on a party, a bunch of people suffocated. He
That's a
was
lot of-
super gay,
how's
very
that
into, having a gay main lover. So the reality is even if you accept that this guy is trans, and a historic example of it, he is like, that's your historic prototype of the modern trans community, right? Which
Oh.
really leans into the trans stereotype that like Freedom Tunes has.
So 3 TERFs are on a beach and they find a genie.
All right, let me stop you right there. Are these women gonna get murdered by you?
I swear you're gonna like this one.
Fine. Okay, go ahead.
They rub the lamp and the genie comes out, right?
Right.
And the genie is me and I murder them all.
Okay, do you see how that's just you murdering people again?
No, because the genie also says, I love cat boys.
No.
Was that trans comic, which, it's something you see. We have our episodes where like you do see disproportionate violence, sexual arousal from trans individuals, and we go into why that might be the case. You see this in Ayla's study. It was well studied in early trans communities. But we're going to go into those a little bit. We're going to go into all of the different cross-cultural things that people say are trans because they're not. You got to understand what a big deal this is as a data point. We're talking about literally all of recorded human history. And you could be like, well, maybe they didn't write it down because it was societally looked down upon at the time. And it's like, doesn't work. We have so many records of gay people throughout history. We have so many records of other things that were taboo in society. We have James Joyce talking about how he's turned on by farts. Not once did anyone think to say, I don't like my birth gender, right? Like they're willing to, in a society that will kill you for doing it, sleep with a guy and write long love poetry, but never once write down in the private journal, I'm just not happy with the gender I was born as. That is a massive data point. And keep in mind, we don't even see an instance of this in cultures that accept people taking on roles that are gender nonconforming. We don't see a single instance of this. So even where it isn't discriminated against, no one ever thought to once in human history until the 1920s put a pen to page and say, I'm not happy with my birth gender. And keep in mind how shocking this is when you contextualize it in the context of how much trans people say that dysphoria affects them in their daily lives, how painful it is to them, how top of mind it is for them in every single human interaction they have. If anyone historically was feeling this, of course, somebody, like, keep in mind, right now we're looking at like 1.5% of the population or something is trans. You think nobody would have written that down ever? That's completely implausible. And I want to notice here with the Elagabalus case here, which is the strongest historical case we have of somebody feeling that way, he never even actually says that. He just seems to be debauchery maxing and thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I had another sex hole, right? Like that's literally what I'm reading from Elagabalus. So with that being the case, I think you're really making quite an astonishing claim to say nobody thought to ever write this down. Nobody thought to ever write it in a private journal. No one thought to ever have it in a private diary. With everything we know about human history, that is absolutely astonishing to me. And to me, it means with like you think even accidentally somebody would have been. Even if dysphoria isn't a phenomenon, somebody might just have like felt this way because they were abused in some sort of weird way that led to this, a convergently looking outcome. But no, to not take this data seriously is to just not be taking reality seriously. So that really annoyed me because I was like, come on, like Dev, I think that Dev's the type of person that if he just dug into the evidence on this, he would stop making such an easily disprovable claim that something that looks like modern gender dysphoria existed anywhere else in history or in any other culture.
Okay.
But the second thing he does, which I think is even more fascinating, is it's the entire perspective that he argues from, which is he went up there and he's like, no reasonable person believes that when you transition your gender, you magically turn into a woman, right? And of course, he was
Did they not tell him?
throttled on X, with many comments
no.
getting like 5x the likes of his comment, telling everyone that this
Whoa.
guy is a demon. How could he say this about trans people? You know, don't you know that trans people are
Ah.
actually women? It was extremely aggressive.
I posted, nobody reasonable actually thinks that trans women metamorphose into biological females. The ask is not believe that men are women. It's don't be an asshole. You don't have to like trans people. You do have to leave them alone. And just so we're clear here, I'm completely correct on this. I might have received a lot of blowback, but I'm not backing down from any of it. I don't care how big of a horde of people showed up to complain. They're all wrong and I'm right. In fact, there were two hordes of people. The first horde was left-wing, deranged trans activists who hopped in to say that HRT does in fact turn trans women into biological females, and saying anything otherwise is transphobic. In fact, according to this crowd, if you side with trans women on every reasonable policy prescription with regards to their individual liberties, but you refuse to believe they become female, then you're exactly the same as a bigoted right-winger trying to force them back into the closet. These people are delusional.
And this brings up the second thing I want to get into, which is like the dev perspective, the last 90s liberal out there, right? And a lot of us were 90s liberals, whether it's J.K. Rowling or us or any number of other people who have since updated their opinions on this. Even Leaflet, I think, previously would have been, you know, pro-trans. And the reason we were pro-trans isn't dissimilar for the reasons that Dev is still arguing today. It was we're like, well, no reasonable person would, if we try to give trans people more rights, start using women's restrooms, allow anyone to just say, I'm a woman and get into a woman's prison, compete in women's sports. Like, no reasonable person would do that. So we can give the trans community these rights and they will self-police because they know that they'll lose these rights if they don't self-police around these issues, right?
Right. Yeah.
And what we all learned is we were wrong.
Whoops.
It's
impossible that it wasn't the case. There was this vision of just let people live their lives, you know, just let them live and it's fine and it will be fine. And there was this assumption that you wouldn't really have bad actors in this great world because if someone went off the rails, they'd be doing it in their own little controlled detonation box. You know, it wouldn't bother us. It wouldn't affect other people. We would never have fathomed that someone would be like, no, this means that I should be allowed to go into, like, as a man, into women's prisons. Like, we just never would have imagined. That's crazy.
What we imagined is, yes, some random psycho may say something like that. Some random psycho may
but
say
no one would listen to them. Yeah.
Yeah, but the entire trans community wouldn't then get up in arms and support them and make their perv dreams an actual reality, right? Like that when it came out that something like, you know, we often point out that the trans swimmer who's super famous, that she was flashing her genitals to girls in a girls' locker room where it is not even normal for girls to fully undress. As we pointed out, that's not normal in modern changing rooms and hasn't been for a long time. And schools are even designed with this in mind these days. So this is just like intentionally using this opportunity to flash people. And then later a bunch of, you know, I don't want to get into all of that, but yeah, it was clear that this was an individual who just wanted to flash people, right? That they didn't then turn on this individual. We're like, well, obviously you're not going to be one of our leaders or archetypes of what it means to be trans, but they didn't. And this is when a lot of us who were just sort of, I guess, the normies out there, we were like, oh, I'm sorry. Like we gave you the knife to do a responsible thing with it. And then you went out and started stabbing people, right? And Dev is interesting because he even sees in his own comments on X that the bad actors have control of the ship, right? Like when you see somebody like Kamala using public funds to do gender reassignment for people in prison, you know, tax dollars, it could be going to homeless people, to gender reassignment in prison, you're like, oh, the people who are in control of the ship, these people go with the extreme take, the take that he said no reasonable person, and most of the people who had this original like liberal perspective on this or libertarian perspective on this went for. And so we've adopted our views. The question is why hasn't he? And the answer is twofold, and he basically gives it in the video. Answer number one is he thinks, and a lot of people think, that simply because if everyone was reasonable, this giving them these rights and giving them these interpretations of gender would work. We collectively, culturally should do this. Okay. And it's a really sad perspective because it's like, yes, I want to operate society as if everyone is sane and well-meaning when that's not the case. Right. And so it's almost a weird sort of liberal deontology, right? Like what is moral is what you would do in a society where people don't act like people. But that's what leads you to horrors like communism and stuff like that, right? Like in a society where everyone was reasonable and responsible and had self-control, communism works, right? But we don't live in that world. And he commented on our last video. First time I'm aware that he's commented on one of our videos where we mentioned that his viewership has dropped because he is seen as sort of betraying the wider movement that we are all part of, which has become the new right, which drifted through internet culture. And he's like, well, I never changed my views. I never became a conservative. I've always been a classical liberal. I never was anti-trans. And I'm just baffled, but we're not criticizing you for changing your views. We're criticizing you for not changing your views as new evidence came out, right? Like we all had those views back then. When I watched your videos, when I loved your channel, I had all the perspectives you had. I was seeking truth. I wanted a better world. And I believed that, we give these people these additional rights and they will use them responsibly and society will work. And then it was the same with things like immigration. We can just take people from other countries, bring them to our country and it'll work and they'll become just like us. And then with both of these instances, we're like, oh, okay, well, clearly this is not working, or whatever. One who was here because we were interested in what was reasonable is like, oh, well, clearly this isn't working, so now we need to address this. I take much more pride in my views that I have changed than in my views that have stayed the same. And I'm beginning to sort of wonder or realize, was Dev ever actually on that journey with us? And this faction of people who say are like still classic 90s liberals or whatever, did they ever really care about what was in the best interest of society? Or did they have like a religious belief in what was the most common cultural belief system of progressives in the 90s, and just as society has changed around them and certain things that we assumed were true back then have been proven untrue, they're just like, but I refuse to change any of my views because this is what was true in the 90s, this is what any reasonable person thought in the 90s, that we can just have as many immigrants as we thought, which I thought I was pro unrestricted immigration back in the day. Okay, because I looked at the Economist research, I looked at that, and I was like, oh, this works. And new evidence has come out. We have tried it at scale. It didn't work, especially the UK. Or on trans issues, where it's like, okay, we'll give you these rights, and you will not use them to do things like go and aggressively try to convert minors, like actively convert on fetish forums, right? Like if somebody was doing that, you'd try to shut that down, right? Okay, good. And then, oh, shoot. Somebody's doing that. You guys shut it down? How dare you stop them, transphobe? And or you won't claim crazy things like you're actually biologically women. And then he sees, oh no, the people running the ship are that's concerning. That's going to cause negative effects for society. And yet he's like, but I will live in the 90s. No new information. Travis Stock was never shot down. We never saw that they were hiding the files showing that putting people on puberty blockers was increasing the risk of wanting to unalive and decreasing their mental health. That this was wide scale throughout the trans industry we saw in the WPATH files. I never updated my beliefs after that. I only operate on 90s research that was done largely by clinics that made their money off of gender transitioning people. And I think that this is really sad that people like him, they'll go cite the research, and I'm like, was that research done by researchers who made their living off of transitioning people? Okay, do you understand how that might be compromised and we might need to look at other sources of evidence? It's important, and I feel like even if you disagree with us, that you take time to understand that when it comes to the anti-trans position of the majority of the leading intellectuals who are anti-trans these days, whether it's Elon or J.K. Rowling or us, we do not come to this because we love tradition for the sake of tradition, because we are attached to traditional gender roles, because we want some old religious hierarchy in place. If anything, we're kind of on the opposite team. We come to this because we wanted a better society and we got new information. And it's the new information that must be dealt with, not the, oh, you're just taking away our rights because you hate us. Obviously, that's not true. All of us had trans friends. Second, he has friends, close friends, who are trans. And are...
Is this something he's mentioned explicitly, or is this an assumption?
He mentions this repeatedly in the video. This is, and I can really understand. If you have close friends who fall into a specific demographic that is in a systemic way acting bad, right, on a global stage, you could be like, I really don't want this friend of mine to have to suffer. They're a nice person, right? But the problem is by taking the action that you are taking, many, many more people who are not your friend end up suffering much, much more, right? Whether it is the people who end up being assaulted, which happened just recently near us in Pennsylvania, the young trans girl who made a hit list of people in the school, and they tried to do something about it, but she had this protected status. And so then she beat a girl, and it was really horrible. And, all the warning signs were there, but trans are the people who lose their medals. They're shot at college. They're shot at scholarships because of this. Or the kids who end up getting transitioned. And now we know from papers that 1 in 10 kids who only, if you look at 14-year-olds with a paper on this, it showed that only 1 in 10 who identifies as not their birth gender ends up still identifying as not their birth gender by the time they're, I think, 21 or 23. And we know that this increases unaliving rates by huge amounts if they end up adopting into this community. We know that going on to, like, when the cast report thing broke down, and it wasn't the cast report, it was the Travis Clinic. When it shut down, and they went through the files and they found the suppressed research.
The WPATH files, right?
Publish. It showed that going on puberty blockers increased unaliving risks. We know now, because puberty blockers have been blocked in the UK, that trans unaliving rates have not gone up. That is a huge sample size. We could have easily seen that if that was the case. It turns out that this entire thing was just wrong and a lie, and people using captured scientific institutions to lie to people. And you can update your beliefs on this, right? Because the point I'm making is you are causing real harm because you don't want your friend to feel bad.
I mean, I think we can relate to it because we have friends who are non-binary, not necessarily. We've certainly met nice people who are trans.
I mean, they're not friends anymore because, of course, I don't want to, like, there's a point where you have to go out there but I mean, for every trans friend that I've lost, I've gained more detransitioner friends. So, like, the reality is I'll tell you, the harassment my detransitioner friends have faced from the trans community dwarfs in orders of magnitude. I mean, like 10, 20x anything any trans friend I have any faced from anyone.
That's true. Yeah.
And this as somebody who's had known trans people and detransitioners. It's not even close. Like, the trans community is like the very definition of bigotry in the way that they treat detransitioners.
Pretty freaking bad. Not good. Not good.
And this is how do I say to somebody, you have to look at the larger picture. Right. And be willing to be like, I can still like this person as a person, and say that we shouldn't harass, like, trans adults on the streets. We shouldn't treat them poorly, but we need to understand that there is something deeply wrong with the community as it exists right now. And just trying to be this, like, moral deontologist around, like, well, if everyone was reasonable in society, when it's been proven to you on your very platforms that that's not the case. And I'm sort of writing this video almost as if I hope Dev watches it. So I'm trying not to be too mean to him, right? Like, please. Like, take a step back from this particular cliff. You are not helping the wider trans community by not admitting that we do actually need to start taking action on this issue. And it gets worse if it turns out that even your friend is suffering from something closer to a culturally bound illness, which is what we'll be arguing with this stuff. Before I get into that, one final thing I wanted to note is an argument that I saw when I was doing some research on this to try to understand this, for, like, women in, trans people joining women's sports, right? Trans
Mm.
males joining women's sports.
Okay.
And a lot of people get tripped up on this argument because they'll say something like, well, Michael Phelps has like dramatically larger lungs and like that's for genetic reasons, right? Like why is he allowed to compete? And yet a trans person who has some, like, because they had a male puberty, larger lungs or something like that, why are they not allowed to compete? Right.
Mhm.
And I think when you actually think through it, the answer is fairly obvious. Suppose there was a surgery that you could get where gills were grafted onto you, or you could genetically engineer some humans to be like triple muscled and be able to breathe basically underwater and blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
Would it be remotely fair or sporting to allow these people to compete in the men's competition? No, nobody would do that, right? Like
No,
we
in the
even
enhanced games, yes. In
in
normal competitions, no.
no, yes. And there is a version of the Olympics that's being built for this, right? This is the reason we banned testosterone, like, or performance enhancing drugs in the Olympics. This is the reason we banned EPO doping in the Olympics. This is the reason we banned many types of like even swimwear in the Olympics because it's gives people too much of a scientific advantage
Yeah.
because that's not the point of the Olympics. If you then created a separate category for the gill people, it would make sense for trans men to compete in that category because they're using a surgery to gain an advantage over other people. Okay?
Yeah.
We used to see jokes about trans people competing in sports teams and being allowed in women's changing rooms as being fundamentally anti-trans because it was seen as so obviously an unfair thing to do.
Come in, dear. Have a seat. Take off your bra if you'd like.
I need to talk. See, I have this problem. I have a terrible secret.
Well, Cindy, we all have our little secrets. Sometimes we do things we're not so proud of to gain the athletic edge on the competition. Sometimes those secrets come back to haunt us.
On that.
Oh, the other thing I note about not wanting to tell a friend, like, yeah, but overall it's bad, is
Mhm.
I would ask Steph, I don't know if he does have any friends like this, but I've also had friends who are Scientologists, right? And it made me very uncomfortable speaking negatively about the church, but the church has destroyed countless people's lives. And
Yeah,
it is
sure.
demonstrably a negative force in our society.
Mhm.
And it's
Well, we've
something
met
that
Scientologists for whom, as far as we can tell on the outside, like it's worked well for them. And like you feel like, okay, well, this is good for you. I'm not going to question your choice to do this, but like on average, I would not have anyone I care about join the church.
yeah, well, and it makes sense to warn people about it. Just as we
Yes,
warn people about gender transition at a young age or normalizing
sure.
this. And if I could
Absolutely.
put legal restrictions on the Church of Scientology, they'd be similar to church. I'd be like, I would want legal restrictions that reduce the number of people coming into the church, but I wouldn't want
Yeah.
to punish people who are like genuine day-to-day believers.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the way we should be approaching this. To the question, and this was the big question in Leaflet's debate. It was the big question Dev focused his video on is, what is a woman? Like, how do you define the word woman? And I largely actually agree with the broader take on Dev's perspective on this. I keep
Mhm.
saying Dev, that's short Fat Otaku's like name, which is a woman is whatever a woman is culturally conceived to be by that particular cultural group. So from my cultural perspective that we have built for our family, a woman is somebody who has the larger gametes and has children. And are you saying somebody is less of a woman if they can't have kids? And it's like, well, kind of. The primary distinction between man and woman is made around what role they play in reproduction. Given that I think that reproduction is particularly core part of the human life cycle, the role that somebody plays in terms of birthing and having kids, yeah, I think that they are functionally, is the 50-year-old woman who is out there sleeping around with 50 guys and having fun. There was an old actress bragging about this being, and who's 50, and Brett Cooper was like, what are you doing? Like, and I felt the same way seeing this 50-year-old like brag about this. Is she less of a woman than the 50-year-old with 3 kids? Yeah, she is. Okay. I know that's an offensive thing to say in our society, but culturally, that is the way I see it. In the same way that culturally trans people see it differently, right? And then you can say, well, if culturally trans people see it differently, then why don't you say, okay, you just do it culturally your way, they do it culturally their way. The reason is is because their cultural perception has numerous negative externalities on the people who adopt it, both in terms of psychological health, self-worth, and outcomes. And worse than that, it's a particularly predatory ideology, which is known for aggressively trying to find new converts in younger individuals. From, setting up conversion pipelines in schools, which is something we've seen, explicitly trying to groom children, which is something we have seen repeatedly. And it's not just like the online, I often play this clip from the Giggly Goon file that I think was quite good, where you see in the forums people talking about, I'm going to hunt children, right? And it's something that they do regularly for sport.
It's genuinely really good grooming advice. I've so far sent it to 4 minors between the ages of 9 and 13. I hope it encourages them to transition. When the Onkazone animation became a meme, they got excited over its virality among kids. Manadrain and Orion also fantasized about getting kids on hormones. Orion was the manager, coercing him every step of the way. Has he started hormones yet? Yes, but not effectively. I guess that's what you'd expect, just telling a retard to buy hormones. They bought estrogen, but no anti-androgen. It would have been more fun if he started hormone blockers at like 12. Haha, isn't that true for everyone? Don't worry, I'll make him into a good girl. Don't blow up our spot, bro. All T-slurs are like that. If you can trust me around your kid, it'd be transphobic not to. Me with daycare tots. To Orion and many of his associates, their identity was little more than a political shield.
And it's something that we have seen with even the Travis Dock Clinic. One of the doctors there was arrested for going to a local park and attempting to recruit kids. Like, this is a repeated phenomenon within the trans community.
Not know about that. That's wild.
And it's not punished by the wider trans community once it's caught. It has to be punished by outsiders. None of this would be...
Also, I just want to point out, this is ancillary to our first and maybe most fundamental philosophical gripe with trans ideology, which is that it violates consent, in that to be trans isn't really so much an internal process as it is involving forcing people to externally do something against their will. They are obligated per your choice to see you and acknowledge you and refer to you by your gender of choice, even if that runs against their instincts and preferences and own philosophy. So what our big thing is, like, with most fundamental, like, 90s progressive live and let be, like approaches, hey, as long as everyone's consenting and letting people live their lives, it's fine. But on a very fundamental level, the modern version of what it means to be trans involves revoking people's consent because they are now obligated to,
exactly,
without checking with them.
It's not about being allowed to live the way you want to live. It is much closer to Catholics all of a sudden deciding they're going to force everyone to call any priest father. And if you don't call a priest father, you get a giant online harassment campaign against you to try to get you to lose your job, and potentially even legal ramifications. I call trans people their preferred gender. I call priests father, even though I don't think those things. I think it's the polite thing to do. But if Catholics decided to attempt to force everyone else to do that, I'd be like, especially against other people's religious beliefs.
Yeah, just like how, like, when we travel in other regions where wearing a head covering is appropriate, I'll wear a head covering, but that if someone's forcing me to do it, that's a very different story. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you do it in those other countries often because you are forced to do it. They will kill you if you don't.
Well, okay, yeah,
that is very much the way the trans community acts, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, yeah.
But I want to get, and when I say they're like, oh, they won't kill you, it's like, well, one, look at all the mass murder trans stuff. You can see our video on that. Like, yeah, they actually will. And there have, with the Charlie Kirk situation, right? Like, yeah, they kind of actually will. But two, they will try to get you, like the online mob will try to get you fired from your job and stuff like that, which we've already had happen to us. And when you have 5 kids or something like that, that's taking away the family's lifeblood. That is not a trivial thing to attempt to do. And it shows that even from Dev's perspective, even he can see it, the community is owned. The culture is now owned by bad actors. And by running cover for them, you are allowing countless amounts of harm on innocent people. But now I want to go into the different cultures that have ideas that trans people claim shows that the trans phenomenon is not something that was basically made up in Germany in the 1920s. The Nazis took it down. Then we don't see a single case of it for like a long time. Then there was one viral news story about a trans person, and then the phenomenon explodes. And this is very similar to anorexia, which is another culture-bound illness that disproportionately targets autistic people, is associated with body dysmorphia. And we have seen things like a viral story happening in Hong Kong, and then it explodes where we don't have any records of it. In the United States, it exploded after a few viral stories. This appears to be a category of culture-bound illness that includes intense susceptibility by autists, involves body dysmorphia, intense discomfort with who you are. And it's something that like we even like Simone suffered intense autism and almost died intense anorexia and almost died of it, right? Like she understands what it feels like to have body dysmorphia, right?
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't mean that she believes that it isn't a culture bound illness, right? Simone?
Yeah, I know it's crazy.
No, but I'm saying, do you believe that it's a culture-bound illness? Like, do you believe that just because you felt it strongly doesn't mean that it must exist in other cultures?
Oh, no, yeah, it's culture bound. It's not like I was trying to conform to some kind of culture. I don't think it was a cultural contagion thing. I think anorexia is actually pretty universal. So maybe it's a bad example. I'm giving you too autistic of an answer.
No,
anorexia
Simone,
is about control.
Hold on, Simone. This is a well-studied phenomenon. Anorexia does not exist in any other human culture at any point in human history. It has been very widely studied.
Oh, yeah, there was come on. There was so before it was called anorexia, it was like, oh, she's fasting for religious purposes. And there were all these girls who were like,
you would have, no, sorry. When anorexia starts being first described in the literature, the people with it look shocking to people. Okay. It is noted as nothing like anything any of these doctors have seen. It did not look like fasting for religious purposes. It did not look like being a quirky girl. When you were skeletal, Simone, you wouldn't have been described in the Victorian times as quirky. People would have described you as skeletal.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying, I think
I actually think that this is really good because you have experienced basically exactly what modern trans people experience. And you show why it's so hard for them to accept that it really was just their culture. And if they had been unaware of the concept of gender transition, if you had been unaware of the concept of anorexia, you would not have expressed your autism in that way.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, no, for sure, like behaviors are typically learned, and you can't really learn a behavior if you've never seen it before.
You can learn a behavior, by the way, you haven't seen before. Same-sex attraction, for example. Same-sex attraction exists across cultures. That is very different from anorexia. And this conversation is so fascinating because you're seeing in Simone's eyes, in the way she's relating with this, she apparently was unaware that anorexia is the poster child of culture-bound illnesses. And it's very hard for her to accept that this body dysmorphia that she felt was downstream of her own culture. So people are aware with how this works in anorexia. Basically, anorexia, like a big news story is what will happen in an area. And then you get tons of cases of anorexia.
And the same happens with unscheduled life ending.
Right, but this is different because when it happens with anorexia, there will not have been a single medically documented case of this for like 300 years. And then you get 50 cases in a year. The other most famous culture-bound illness is multiple personality disorder, which does not appear to be real. You see a movie about it or a story about it, and then a bunch of people start expressing it. But we don't have really robust.
But I think so. Not like just in my defense, I think cutting is a good example of something similar to anorexia, whereas like sure, like these things are new, but like you had people religiously self-harming well before cutting became a trend that emerged in high schools, and someone in the Victoria era would find it to be.
Yeah, but cutting,
bizarre.
I am aware of a lot of self-harm rituals historically.
Yeah.
It's not analogous because we are aware of self-harm rituals historically. We are not aware of something like anorexia historically. We are aware of fasting, but fasting in the way it happens with anorexia And I think that your being so perplexed by this shows how trans people must feel, right? When the evidence is so against something that felt very intuitive to you. It felt like an intuitive way to act when it was within your cultural landscape. And this appears to be one of the effects of autism.
No, come on. There were spoonies in the Regency era.
There were spoonies in there, but there were not anorexics.
Yes, there were. No, I mean, okay.
Simone, we have like
definitely there were. No, there were definitely like women, especially women, though I mean sometimes men too, have been recreationally and by their own choice choosing to restrict their calories or burn more. For example, Sisi, the empress known as Sisi,
Simone, because your mind
100% definitely anorexic and famously would eat just like broth and worked out in a weird ass gym that everyone thought was insane and maintained very small size. She was Sisi, Empress Sisi. Like Empress Austria. She was an Austrian empress. She was very famous. She's definitely existed before the modern concept of anorexia. She was 100% anorexic. And even more
I'm gonna look this up because I think that you actually
I think that I know that you're wrong. And I mean, I also get your point though, that like social contagion's a real thing and it's also very hard to see it when it's happening. And you want to believe that what you're doing.
Let's pull this up. Simone, because you're acting like a trans person right now. You are scared about being proven wrong because you are doing what trans people do.
Malcolm, I'm so happy to just lose arguments, but I know that I'm right.
Take a step back here, okay? I will explain how your argument actually shows the mental gymnastics that trans people do.
Okay.
Okay? I point out that anorexia, this becoming absolutely skeletal, not general calorie restrictions, not being quirky in how you eat, not fasting. So, just in case to give this away, no, Princess Sisi looked nothing like the phenomenon we call anorexia today. This happened after 2 of her children died. She went into a period of intense depression. And not depression like we talk about it when we talk about, there's a lot of comorbidity between anorexia and depression. No, that's teen girl stuff. We're talking about one day her daughter died, and then for the next 3 weeks she didn't eat. And then she built a habit of almost never eating after that. That is not like modern anorexia. One of them died by unaliving. It was later in her life. She went into intense fasting because of her children's deaths. This is not what anorexia looks like. This isn't a teen girl deciding to become super skinny, right? Or obsess over calorie restriction. This is a mom who lost 2 of her kids in quick succession, going through some sort of like a psychological break. To even compare the two is kind of horrifying. In the same way, as we'll go over the trans stuff, a lot of the trans people will be like, oh, that's a trans community. And it's like, well, actually, this is a community that has their genitals cut off so they look like girls so they can be sold for sex work. That's not like... It's kind of horrifying that you would call that a trans community. In the same way that it is horrifying that Simone would correlate this woman's experiences with hers. Anorexia becoming horrifyingly skeletal and freakish looking to outsiders was not a phenomenon that was recorded in history. And you hear calorie restriction in the same way that when I say gender dysphoria is not a phenomenon that was recorded in history, and trans people hear identifying as a different gender. Their brain intentionally twists what they're hearing into something else so they don't have to face the reality that they succumb to a cultural trend. But I am going to look this up because, okay, you might be right, Simone. So, sorry to tell you this. Empress Sisi Do you know how long she lived?
How long did well, like all her kids died and she lived way too long. She probably should have died young.
No. Okay, so you've already disproven your points when you just said all her kids died. If she had had anorexia that was like modern anorexia, she would not have been able to conceive children in the first place. 2, she lived until she was 60 and did not die from thinness. So clearly not like modern anorexia. 3,
Well, I'm a functional anorexic and I'm probably not going to die from my thinness.
you would have died at the weight you were when you were a kid. Your body shut down and you still do not produce eggs naturally because of your thinness. You were well worse than anything Empress Sisi reached in her life. And I want to point out that Empress Sisi was the best random example that somebody with deep historical knowledge like Simone was able to think of. And Simone is a random effing person who had anorexia, and it's not even a big person of her personality or how she sees herself. She had something so bad that she can never produce eggs again. And Princess Sisi regularly had children. The idea that you could compare these two and be like, oh, this is a good example from history, borders on the comical. And I'd point out, as you're seeing here, there are many pictures of her from the period. She is claimed to be at her skinniest. And she does not look like an anorexic at all. And this is really important. It's really important because what we can see is this desperation to not have been influenced by culture, to have some historical precedent, to have this be part of the human condition, to want to say, no, somewhere else in history, someone else did this. And when reality does not conform with this, to begin to filter all of the information that's hitting her. Like, obviously, Simone is a smart, intelligent, like, well-read, thoughtful woman. And this psychological break of realizing no one ever did this before like the 1950s. This psychological break of being like, and it's the same with her. She's like, oh, but there were people who practiced calorie restriction in the past. Therefore, there were anorexics in the past. No. There were people who presented as different genders at specific parts of history. Therefore, there were people with gender dysphoria that mirrored modern transness. No. And recognizing this is necessary for us to make the right logical choices for society. Okay, 3, we have lots of paintings of her that I am now looking at, and they look nothing like a modern case of anorexia. You want to look up pictures of her.
Oh, you're vindictive. You're so cute.
There are lots of even photos of her. Photos, so you know they didn't fake.
I know. I'm looking up. Yeah, she doesn't look like a commit. How do I say committed? Diehard anorexic.
No, but you're actually fascinating here because you have a condition and you went through a condition analogous to transness, a culture-bound illness that desperately tries to seek for validation in history. I was not just following a cultural trend. And you basically crashed out trying because you hear something similar in history and then your brain shaves off the edges of how it wasn't actually like what you went through. Because if you're dealing with an analogous mental disease, culture-bound mental disease, it can help you see it from their position better. And how
I don't feel like I'm missing their perspective. I think you and I have been as empathetic as we can be to the trans cause. It's just that, I guess, similarly to anorexia, we're like, hey, this isn't healthy. This doesn't produce good outcomes. Maybe there are better ways this can be managed.
That's not the point I'm making here. Okay. The wider point I'm making here is this is a phenomenon that started in the 1920s, got popular in the 1950s, and literally is in no other culture and nowhere else in human history. Okay, it is not a part of the human condition. It is a cultural phenomenon. All right. And that doesn't mean that they don't feel it as strongly as you felt anorexia, or my family members who have had anorexia have felt anorexia. Okay. So to continue here, because now I'll go over the various instances, but even you can't fully admit oh my God, this is not something we see in other cultures and follows a very specific pattern within autistic populations. And you grab at things that look kind of like it. And we'll go over how trans communities do. So let's start with two-spirit people, because you hear this a lot.
Yeah. Right? Well, but also I never heard about it. We did so much in terms of Native American studies in my Californian public schools. never heard about two-spirit people. So that's like a new thing in the.
Well, because do you know when the term how two-spirit people were invented? And I think a lot of people in the trans community are like genuinely unaware that this is where this concept came from.
No, tell me.
Myra Larimi, a Fisher River Creek Nation counselor, in 2021 stated that the phrase came to her in a dream/vision during the summer of 1980.
1980?
Yes, while she was at a protest. In the dream, she was in a teepee with her indigenous mother on a hunger strike. 7 spirits appeared, shifting between male and female forms. 2 of them declared her niece Manawagi in whatever, I can't pronounce that. She shared this vision at a conference in a sharing circle of about 80 indigenous LGBT plus people across North America. After sharing this, it was formally opposed and quickly adopted at the 3rd annual Intertribal Native First Forum's Gay and Lesbian American Conference. This took place in 1990. We don't have any historical examples of anything like this existing, not in like some cultures. Some people want to say, well, Native American cultures have a huge degree of cultural diversity. And it's like, despite that huge degree of cultural diversity, we don't have anything that looks like any good record of anything that looks like a two-spirit person.
Have I just been gaslit then? Because I could have sworn I've either read articles or listened to podcasts about how like there were two-spirit people and the two, like in at least some tribes, and these two-spirit people are kind of seen as like with spiritual leaders in the tribe, like
it's made up. We do not have
historical. So someone they just made it up. They just made it up.
Well, you know,
some woman in the 80s had a dream.
And I bet that we were extra spiritual. Here, what we do have evidence of. I do have some Spanish records of Native Americans having same-sex relationships, which they were very aghast at. And some Native Americans in these same-sex relationships would dress like and take on the role of a female in their community.
But so that doesn't happen.
That's not trans. That is, we see this in our society. We have gays, we have twinks. Okay, twinks is a well-known phenomenon. And this is what we'll see throughout this. There's a lot of these examples that people call trans are gay people where one of them takes on a more feminine role within the community and within the relationship. And that is something that we also have in Western culture back to the beginning of time. But that is very different than intense discomfort with your gender and a desire to change your gender.
Yeah, that does not describe gender dysphoria. It right. may describe gender euphoria.
You and desperately grasping with examples for anorexia would be like, yes, a lot of people talk about two-spirit. It must.
I still don't know. I didn't even identify as an anorexic at the time.
The next example we have are the hijra from South Asia, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. These are individuals that, for young males who, due to poverty, have been ejected by their families, end up joining all male communities that undergo a practice where they are castrated for 2 things. One is the communities make their money predominantly for 2 things. One is a religious ceremony that you can only do if you've been castrated. And then 2, the bigger source of income is prostitution. So basically, it's a way for extremely poor boys in these societies who are forced to go into sex work to get more clients by appearing more feminine and then make some money on the side with a specific religious role for individuals like this.
Oh, that's rough.
These individuals are not super accepted in society. They are like, this is not like a super celebrated role in these Indian communities either, by the way. It is actually kind of ghoulish that these people are called trans, or, you know, the West specifically pushes on them this concept of trans because they're really child victims often. And on top of that, they identify as a third gender, not men or women. They do not have gender dysphoria so much that they have no interest in other people identifying them with the opposite gender. So you cannot claim that this is something analogous to the trans phenomenon. Okay, next. The Fa'afa'im, in the manner of a woman, are natal males who naturally exhibit feminine traits or behavior. They are not considered women by society. They do not want to be considered women by society. And they are mostly effeminate men who enter same-sex relationships with men. Again, we would call this twinks in today's society. Nobody would confuse this with a trans individual. However, where transness has entered these cultures, some of these individuals have decided to adopt Fafaim as a name, and now they say, oh, and this always was trans, but that's not what we see in the historic literature, okay? The Muxe, Zapo culture in Mexico. So they're biological males who adopt the presentation and roles, often women's work. They have cultural acceptance and family integration, but they are not seen as women. They are seen as a distinct third gender. And they are mostly effeminate men in same-sex relations with other men. We also do not have any good records of this existing pre-Spanish colonization. Some people will say that we like answer like in terms of the actual evidence, we don't. We do
Was
not
this
have
not
any
just because that was when it was first documented, like in records that we still have? Because so many records were like burned and stuff, if memory serves, when Europeans first came to.
Or it could be that this is a modern phenomenon. Another good example of a modern phenomenon that is put as an older phenomenon are the Kathe, or the lady boys of Thailand, and the Balakao of the Philippines.
Okay.
And this is a group that people most identify as like a really good example of a true third gender.
Oh, okay. But is this not just another case of men who are impoverished doing what they can to make money?
Well, we'll get into that. But a lot of people in these cultures do gender transition today and do act as prostitutes and identify as trans.
By the way, this also happened in like Middle Ages Europe. If you, for example, were to look for sex workers, you would find some women, but you would also find a lot of men masquerading as women.
Yes, but that's
this is not like an Asian thing or a like Mexican thing. It's a people want to make money thing, need to make money, need to not die thing.
So how far back did this go? We have one early record potentially of this. A Chinese explorer, Zhang Danong, who noted androgynous cross-dressing males, Khmer, but specifically he notes them as a part of the sex industry. They were sex workers. It was a way to get clients by taking on this effeminate role.
Well, I guess it should be noted that many men, male to female trans individuals in like working within modern woke culture who would like sort of identify as like the modern new trendy of trans are sex workers. Like that's kind of that's more of a through line than gender dysphoria for sure.
So we actually, and I'm going deeper on this one because this one is one where you see people who identify as trans and as members of this community. And it's the only one where you see this. The problem is we don't have any good records of this community existing before the 1900s, at least in the regions where they are predominant today. They appear to be a holistically modern phenomenon. And if they have any ancient roots, it's as a type of sex worker, which is very different from, and if people are like, well, a lot of trans people are forced into sex work, don't you know that? And it's like, yeah, but it's the directionality. These are people who are impoverished, realize men want to sleep with things that look like women and will pay to, so they change their body to look that way. They are not people who change their body to look that way and as such go impoverished, right? More, because I want to be exhaustive here. We have the Gali. These are self-castrating male devotees who wore women's clothes, makeup, and performed ecstatic rituals. Romans did not, these were not treated as a normal part of Roman society. Romans called them half men. They were regularly mocked in Roman society. So first of all, and two, they were a religious cult and they were seen as a religious cult, right? This is not, I think, anything close to what we would consider trans today, and certainly not close to what we would consider societal acceptance or some alternate role or some evidence of gender dysphoria in history. They look much more like, and so do many of these other groups, much more like castrados than modern trans individuals. If people are not familiar with castrados, the only reason trans individuals don't claim castrados as trans is because everybody knows castrados weren't trans. Castrados were young boys who were often forced to be castrated so that they could keep a high singing voice for nobles. That is not trans. That is a child victim.
Yeah.
Now, a final one, and I think that this one really shows how bad faith people are who attempt to bastardize and steal these other cultural traditions to normalize their own struggles, right? Is the sworn virgins. This is in the Balkans, especially in the Albanian region. And these are biological females who adopt a lifelong virginity and adopt male roles, dress, roles, rights, etc. The problem is that we have no records of anyone ever doing this because they feel they're in the wrong body. Okay, why do women do this in Balkans tradition? Because women can't own property in the Balkans tradition. And so women do this so that they can own property or be the heir of the family or escape an arranged marriage they don't want to do. We have plenty of records of that. And so let's go into the Jewish play. The guy's name is Kaliumas ben Kalemas. At no time in history, he wrote in 1286 to 1328 in Provence, France. And at no point from then into the year 2000 did anyone think this poem was about something other than a joke. Okay? And it was a joke that had meaning to people. The idea
how did you say province?
So that people can understand why this would have been funny to Jewish people of the time, while also sharing a brief message. It's a joke about wanting something absurd and not accepting the way that you're born. It's literally an inversion of the concept of transness. Woe to me, my mother, that you ever bore a son. What a great loss and no gain. Cursed be the one who announced my name to my father. It's a boy. The messenger shall be held guilty of bloodshed. Cursed be he. Woe to him who has male sons. Upon them a heavy yoke has been placed of restrictions and constraints, some in private, some in public. Now, remember, this guy's an Orthodox Jew, so he's not talking about minor constraints here. It can be very difficult to be a Jewish man. But of course, he's writing all of this with the knowledge of like what would have made this funny, this line funny, right? And explicitly shows that he's telling a joke here. Is any Orthodox Jew would be aware that yes, being a male as an Orthodox Jew means you have a huge number of constraints in your daily life, in how you live, in how you interact with the world. But obviously women have even more constraints than you. They are a different set of constraints, but they are surely greater than those that you are under. And so he's saying this is a joke. Like, I'm not even considering what it would be like to really be a woman. I just don't like being me, right? And yet the first few lines of this, and I'm cutting out the stuff that doesn't affirm a trans interpretation of this, just to make it even more so you can see how they see it, because there's some of this that's just fluff talking about other stuff, really sounds like a modern day trans person. So a modern trans person reads that and then doesn't get the Orthodox Jewish context that makes this a joke in the second part. Sever statues and awesome commandment 613. Our Father in heaven, if you hear he's talking about all the rules he has to follow. If only you turn me from male to female. If only the craftsman who created me would have made me a decent woman. I may today have been a woman, wise and smart, spinning with her hands. And perhaps I would be skilled enough in spinning. And I would say, how lucky am I? And then the poem ends with an inversion of a Jewish blessing, basically saying like a satanic curse almost, you could think of from the perspective of like, blessed are you, O Lord, for has not made me a woman. You can think of this as like if you said like amen, but an inversion of this. Now keep in mind, this is an Orthodox Jew. He does not mean to blaspheme God, right? He is saying that all of these ideas would represent an inversion of the natural order, right? That's what makes the joke funny, okay? And again, when he's complaining about being a man, his primary complaint about being a man, even though at one point he does refer to his genitals as like a defect or a blemish, the primary complaint is all the rules that he has to follow. And yet women have more rules and not getting to make his money spinning. And yet spinning is a harder thing than what he, a rabbi, would have to do, which is education. Now, if we look at what people historically thought of this, we've got Joseph Coster in 1900. He wrote, quote unquote, a masterpiece of Hebrew satire that passes in review, quote, all of the social positions of which men are proud of and argues that they are a vanity, end quote. He then notes of the entire work that this guy did, and it's a very long work. He said this was one of the most humorous parts, right? So this was not like a maybe this was satire, maybe it wasn't. It was seen as clearly satire until after transness existed as a phenomenon. Now, when we're talking about the Roman Empire that I was talking about, we can go to Cassius Dio, a Roman senator and historian who was a near contemporary of Elagabalus. He lived through the reign and was politically affected by it. He recorded this in Roman History, Book 80, the thing about him wanting to actually change his gender. However, we've also already gone through all of the other horrible things that this guy did that could have been exaggerations. I mean, you could just say, okay, they're exaggerating about him to make him look bad because he killed a bunch of people, which he did. And he did a lot of blasphemous stuff. He tried to change Roman religion to a new religion. So people really, really, really hated him. But either you accept that the only real trans individual we have in history is one of history's greatest monsters, or we accept that a guy that tried to change the religion of Rome had a lot of people with a motivation to make stuff up about him, to make him look bad, and talking about bad emperors was in Roman tradition as a historian as being effeminate, because they would often do this. It was like shorthand for, and this is how you know he was bad and not acting with good action.
Yeah, sort of common, like I guess maybe the modern analogy of like, well, he had an affair with or like molested one of his aides, but this is just the Roman version of it.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's kind of like a common ring of truth to it. I mean, there were plenty of emperors who had their, stable of male lovers.
Oh, this guy had this guy had such a stale of male lovers. He was well known for, he opened the baths to the Roman public so that he could walk around the baths and look at people. And then he even had specialized servants that would go to the baths like every day or something and look for whichever men were the most well endowed and bring them back to him.
Oh, God bless. He does own Ghislaine Maxwell. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, he was sort of a debauchery maxer. Like that was his core thing seemed to be maximize debauchery as extremely as you can. If you see our Life of a Cenobite episode, maybe this is a true convergent example of maybe something like the life of Anna Valens, right? But to continue, when did transness appear if we don't see it at any point in human history or in any other culture? The first thing that we can see that looks anything like modern transness was Hirschfeld's lab in around 1910. So, okay, a bit before the 1920s, where he had 17 detailed cases. And this was in Germany. And then the Nazis came in and they burned down all his stuff. And after this, as far as I'm aware, there is not a single known case of a trans individual until 1952, after the Christine Jorgensen media explosion. So
the name sounds familiar. Should I know it?
Yes, she was a media phenomenon. Born George Jorgensen, 26-year-old American ex-GI, underwent male to female sex reassignment in Denmark. And when he returned to the US, there was the ex-GI becomes blonde beauty, sometimes referred to as ex-GI becomes blonde bombshell, that went around in all the tabloids and everything like that.
Okay, Christina, was it pulled off? That's the real question.
Well, the point is that the news acted like it was both pulled off and something you could aspire to. And then if you look at the guy who is seen with Benjamin, the next guy to build a lab, Harry Benjamin. This was, he built a lab in I want to say, his landmark book came out, The Transsexual Phenomenon, in 1966. So almost 10 years after the Christine Jorgensen case. And he said to Christine Jorgensen, this is a guy who wrote the book on this, who started the first lab.
Not bad.
Yeah, it passes pretty well.
Yeah.
So I can see how that individual made this look glamorous enough to a lot of people who are looking to reinvent themselves, who are looking for a sense of control, like you. I also want to point out that this case really shows that America is not culturally reflexively anti-trans. I haven't been able to find a single newspaper article on this case that was negative. It's all stuff like nature's error forces girl to live as boy, or ex-GI, blonde bombshell beauty. People only became anti-trans, you take like J.K. Rowling or something like that, after interacting with the trans community and the way that they decided to use these particular privileges that were granted to them. So this is what the guy who literally started the lab that all of the modern trans movement grew out of. Well, him and Joe Money, they worked alongside each other. I'm trying not to treat this negatively, but Joe Money was operating at the same time. If you're unfamiliar with his story, he took children, lied about them being able to change their gender by raising them as another gender, forced them to sleep with each other in front of them, lied that they now adopted the new gender that they had gone into. One of them unalived themselves. He hid that. Then he started a clinic that did this to thousands of other children,
Really
ruining
sick.
their lives. Really a genuinely psychopathic human being, like one of history's greatest villains. But if we say, okay, he's not the source of the trans movement, this Benjamin guy is, right? Well, what Benjamin said was, indeed, Christine, without you, probably none of this would have come to happen. So what he's saying is in all of his interviews, everybody cites her as the reason they decided to transition. And then that snowballed into a wider phenomenon. Now, this Christine person, did they genuinely have gender dysphoria? They might have had some super rare something or another. But when you consider and you look at society today and you're seeing like 1.5% of people identify this way, what we can say is that is not something you see in history. It's a modern phenomenon. And this is very important because if it's a modern phenomenon and this very high unaliving rate, this very high ideation rate that you see with this very high depression rate you see with this are tied to this personal way of dealing with specific, I might even say autistic urges. Let's say it's some version of like psychological urge that certain peoples get around body dysmorphia. It turns out that the correct way to mitigate the harm from this is to tone down exposure to people. That means exposure in the school systems. That means exposure through speakers. I know it's sad, but the harm, and as Simone 100% believed, I am not influenced by culture when I'm doing severe calorie restriction. This is a totally me thing. It's not because I saw somebody else do it. When you have whatever this condition is, and I think that it is the same condition, when you have whatever this condition is, you are particularly resistant towards accepting this fact. And this is why I tried to bring all this evidence together in this episode, along with somebody who suffered an analogous condition, so that people who are suffering this can maybe like just get enough evidence all at once that they can break through and finally get to the other side and be like, oh my God, this is really not part of the natural human condition. And as strong as it feels to me, it's not real. And it is hurting me to engage with it in this way. And anybody who's heard me or seen my history or goes through my history of comments, they know I am not approaching it like this because I am bigoted against trans people, right? Like I'm not like angry at trans people over anything. I have no reason to like dislike trans people at a personal level. I have had trans friends. I was in the GSA as a kid, right? I fought for when I had a significantly smaller platform, but I fought for trans people being accepted in society before I knew how people were going to end up using this as a weapon to hurt women. Okay. Second, and when I say as a weapon to hurt women, if you're unfamiliar with how this is happening, I'll just broadly lay this out for you. You know, in school, if you grew up before this happened, how there was that kid who was a complete sex pest and liked, I remember at my school, there was a kid who was famous for being caught masturbating outside the women's dorms while eating fried chicken, just like obese kid, by the way, too. Just complete slovenly sex pest who doesn't respect other people's boundaries. Do you not think that if you told him, hey, if you say you identify as a woman, you won't be punished in the same way, that he wouldn't take advantage of that?
Yeah, like, I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Of course
he'd be crazy not to. Yeah.
You're giving these sorts of sex pests this tool, okay? And it is unfortunate that the people who get caught up in this like autistic version of it that Simone had are dragged down because of this, or that they can't. Well, it'd probably be better if they didn't have their toy anyway, because it still seems to hurt them as well. It seems to not be the best way. It seems to be telling somebody with anorexia to identify as an anorexic. And obviously that's not a good thing to do. That's going to make that's like the pro-Ana movement. It's like we normalize pro-Ana. People don't know that's the movement that is trying to normalize and glamorize anorexia. And like, we shouldn't be shamed for this, and we should, be who we are. And it would be fine. Like, and obviously, I'm the type of person, if you could take a pill and just become a woman, whatever, right? If it didn't have all these negative effects, I wouldn't care. I'm not out here because, like, from a Christian perspective, I don't think they should be doing this. I'm not out here because some trans person tried to ruin my life or cancel me or something like this. I'm not out here because I was personally harassed by a trans person or something like
You
this.
care about human flourishing, and when you see that there's something that just clearly is nerfing people at best, and at worst destroying and ending their lives in horrible ways, you want to speak up about it.
Yeah, I'm out here because the preponderance of evidence that we have access to now, unfortunately, does not make it look as if, and like, we have evidence at the level of an entire country now banning puberty blockers at the level of the UK. That's like the quality of a study at that level is enormous. Like, that can't be faked, that can't be edged. We just know that people are not unaliving themselves because they're not able to get access to this. And now that we know that, we have to say, okay, we need to start rethinking all of this. And that's unfortunate. And people can be like, yeah, I hope that Dev comes to the light on this, because in the past, I really respected him as an intellectual. And I know that right now he's sort of going through a hard time with his followers because he's been kind of ideologically captured by a certain friend group, is my guess, that he's not able to see that, like, new evidence is out there now, right? Like, when in the episode, he said something like, and we know that this is the best solution to lower, like, unaliving rates for people who have this. And it's like, actually, that's been broadly disproven at this point, both from the UK, the country level source, us finding out that mainstream trans clinics were hiding information at the Travis.Kyle case and the WPATH file release, and the studies that have been used to argue this being very poorly conducted and by hugely ideologically captured institutions. We actually went through an episode. We have one episode where we go through all these studies, and the ones that people are always citing, they were done by a clinic that made its primary source of income by helping people gender transition. Like, come on, Dev, you're not stupid. You must be able to see that a country level data set at the level of the UK is a better source of data than a clinic that makes its income off of this and is dependent on it continuing to happen. And like Joe Money would have to admit that they were monsters and hurt a ton of children because they couldn't admit this earlier. And I think that with our Joe Money episode, we argued that's why he didn't. But anyway, thoughts, Simone?
I think it's interesting and it's important. And I don't know. I mean, my general take is, in the past, people were able to express various forms of what people can now refer to as gender, like either the way they want to bang other people or get themselves off or dress or style themselves or relate to other people. Like, they just dealt with it and they didn't force other people to conform with it. And this new version, whatever it is most uniquely different to me in that it does. And I agree that pretending that this thing has been around forever is inaccurate at best. And I also had no idea the extent to which we'd been gaslit about it. Like, that there are
like two-spirit people, right?
Two-spirit, yeah. Because that was just, I don't know. I've become a lot more incredulous, but I still figured, like, I don't know, that kind of makes sense, I guess.
Yeah,
but it's
what you think. Well, there's a lot of Native American tribes out there. Presumably, at least one had a dedicated third gender role that was more similar to transness than similar to being a gay twink.
Yeah, it just seems so screwed up that people would make that up. Yeah. Anyway, so this has been enlightening, and I appreciate your looking into it.
Well, what's cooler, or more, whatever you want to think of, but more pathetic, is the secondary thing they decided to add to this made-up role, which is, and they were treated as spiritual guides for their communities.
Oh, right, yes, and they were in some way, like, spiritually, mystically, and morally superior. Yeah.
Like, you see the narcissism on display there, right?
I didn't even think about that.
An invented role, and then they invent importance to it. They can't just say, oh, it was an alternate role in the society, right? And keep in mind, for most of these other societies that we have access to, when they were trans, they like when they fit this, it wasn't trans. In almost no society do you have trans of all the ones we went through. Normally it's a third gender, and normally it's a discriminated third gender. So it's just, you need to break this for the people who are trying to be, and I want to believe that Dev is genuinely trying to be intellectually honest in the way he's approaching this, and that he does wants what's best for people, and that if he just had access to all of the information, he would change his mind. Because I think most sane people would. I even think most sane trans people would.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, maybe, I don't know. Again, like, even per your argument, the correct response I should be making is, oh, like, my excessive exercising and calorie restriction was in response to a social trend that I was surrounded by, whereas I feel like I had a very different experience. But like, so I should be saying that, whereas I don't feel that way. So
yeah, this is why you're such a good case for this.
I know. So I'm maybe people in the comments can explain this to me.
This phenomenon, but this is what's very important about this phenomenon.
Yeah.
If it happens to you, and you're not one of these just sex pests who's using it for cover, it doesn't feel like you caught a social phenomenon. It feels like a decision you made for yourself, and an obsession
I didn't actively choose to do it. I kept doing it because it made me feel a little better. But I mean, yeah, presumably that's
a tool for control.
But I feel like what happened with trans stuff in schools, especially with young women who are transitioning, was this did happen with friend clusters. I didn't have friends who did this. So
right, and that might be a completely separate phenomenon. My guess is the trans community is predominantly 4 groups. One group has this form of dysphoria that you had. They do not need a lot of priming to begin to exhibit transness.
That one makes sense. Where like you feel dysphoria, you hate your body, and then someone mentions like, oh, maybe you have this. You can take this pill and make it all stop. And that is very appealing. And that would be the version of trans that I fell into, would have fallen into. Then there's the other groups that are like, well, all your friends are doing it. And so in the similar way that like cutting spread, or
I'd flesh out this secondary category a bit more than just all your friends are doing it. You're going through puberty, you feel uncomfortable with your body, you're going through a lot of changes you don't like, and somebody says there's an out. And there's a culture that will affirm you and tell you that, you know, your body is good, that you are good, that you should be accepted, and they will never criticize you as long as you go along with them. And this can be very appealing. And you even hear some people like Zizian, the guy who founded the trans murder cult. Zizian said that he went through gender transition because he was afraid of going through puberty.
They were Zizians. He was Ziz.
Ziz, whatever. He was afraid of going through puberty. So I think that this is like a cluster of ideas here. It's a bit of a cultural contagion and a bit of a good like mimetic virus. And for these people, they are partially aware that, you know, it was in part influenced by a friend group, right? Now they are less true trans. And I would put the version of trans that's more like anorexia, it's probably the truest form of trans there is.
Disagree, because no, I think that's very different, because that's not a desire to be the different gender. That's feeling in general, like a general body dysmorphia, and then falling into a common solution that's presented to people who show body dysmorphia. Like, you know, because now there's this preponderance of people who are like, oh, you're trans. Whereas before it would always be something else, like, oh, you just need to power through it. Or like, I don't know, talk to God more. You know, like people used to give other solutions. Yeah. So I don't actually see them as trans. I think there's a different group of people that falls into the culture and believes in it for that reason. Maybe also they're goaded on by it.
The other two groups in the trans community, other than the ones who have something analogous to anorexia, then there's the ones who have something that is, you know, you'll have a community that will accept you. You're going through puberty, you're uncomfortable with your body, and here's how you both get social acceptance and are comfortable with your body. It's one simple trick. And then the next group, because I'm going to say there's 4 core groups here. These are the groups this group I would just call the sex pests. These are the people who realize that they can use this to gain access to women's spaces. And when people are like, no trans person does this, and then I ask you, okay, let's say no real trans person does this. Do you think a cis person, a cis male, would have such low morals and such a voracious sexual appetite that they would do it? Of course, they're like, well, of course, some cis males would do. And I'm like, well, those cis males are now using the trans identity, right? You can say, oh, cis males are terrible, but they're using your identity to do this. The guy jacking off outside the girl's dorm, or the guy, this seems to very clearly be the case of, it was Leah Thomas was the swimmer, right? Who kept flashing people in the restroom. And then there was a bunch of weird porn stuff with her when that was all leaked. By the way, you're not familiar with this, Leah Thomas had a secret Instagram account where they would frequently like posts and images that were explicitly tied to AGP related content, e.g. content that suggested that trans people are only trans people because they were turned on by acting like women, and it makes it very clear that Leah Thomas was AGP. This was a sexual fetish for them, and this is not some outsider accusing them of this. This is them saying, yeah, that's why I'm doing this. That's what turns me on. Like, when I advocated for trans rights back in the day, I assumed I was not just advocating for the rights of flashers who wanted to violate women's autonomy, violate women's consent. And so when I saw somebody very clearly doing this, and the trans community not being like, oh, that person isn't us, that person doesn't stand for us, but instead doubling down, no, that is what we're fighting for, I was like, oh, I've been used. I was a patsy. And I think that there's a point where somebody like Dev needs to be like, am I being used to protect flashers who want to violate women's autonomy? And then there was and no, this was before she went through her surgery, right? Like this, she just appears to have been a sex pest. And these are the people who in prison are like, I'm trans now, because they get access to the women's prison, and then they grape a bunch of women. And this has happened multiple times, and everybody must realize that this is like an actual, like the most problematic group. And then the final group, which is like, okay, almost as problematic as that group, is these are predominantly men, but sometimes also women, who seem to get aroused by convincing other people to transition. It's a power fetish for them. We've seen this in the trans maxing community is very clearly partially about this. We've seen this in the Giggle and Goon files. We've seen this in some other parts of the trans community. And I loop them in with the other people. I guess it's a separate category of this, the AFABs or whatever, who have some sort of fetish tied to this. But it's not about converting other people. And then that's this other part. It's this very aggressive and predatory part of the community that is specifically about. And keep in mind, people are like, why would somebody want this? Well, if you look at their own writings talking about it, because there have been, they're like, dude, like if I can convince a young boy to get on puberty blockers, I get like a prepubescent child for like the next 10 years. Like these people are truly debauched, but this is what they say in their private message boards, right? And I mean, it makes sense, right? Like they found a way to make PDA fileness legal. And keep in mind that individuals like this, have, well, we won't get into the Harvey Milk situation, but
there's too many cans of worms here.
Yeah. All right. Any thoughts on Short Fat Otaku, Dev, Leaflet, the debate, anything?
Leaflet can do nothing wrong in my view. She comes at everything from both a place of intelligence, but also humility. It would be shocking to me that.
Yeah, that's what the AI review of her debate kept saying. It was like, throughout the debate, it is noted that she appeared very kind and understanding and wanting to like understand their perspective, and that
so respectful. Yeah, even when she like goes over other streams, she like waits for the person's sentence to stop before commenting. She's just so kind and so
debate was that Leaflet was overly conciliatory and didn't want to interrupt the person, so they kept ranting at various points.
Oh, yeah, that would.
That's a very Leaflet. Yeah,
because she has courtesy. Oh my gosh, no one knows how to do. I don't know how to do that anymore. I interrupt you all the time. I'm terribly rude. I'm really sorry about that. Anyway, I love you.
Love you too.
And yeah. Do you want though? Have we?
No, we did it once.
We did? Oh God, never again. Never again. A lot of the people, I share your surprise by the people who are like, meh, like AI is not going to work.
Oh my God, it's literally erasing so many jobs right now.
Yeah, like what do you think is happening right now? I think some people were like, oh, the unit economics don't work out, like the energy is not going to work. Well, we're going to blow up the data centers, like all these things. There are answers for these things. I don't get it.
Yeah, automated drone swarms cost less than you. And your entire army that wants to blow up automated drone swarms. If people go to war on data centers,
literally one hotel night in your average United States hotel costs less than you. If we're talking about the rate of a hit by like a Mexican, it's like $250 unless the price has gone up to kill someone. If you want to hire someone in Mexico to do it. But maybe those are the in Mexico rates, not the in United States rates. I haven't, haven't checked recently. Got to get back on that market. Other people being like, well, with this kind of wealth divide, like there just won't be anyone left to buy anything. But then I think a lot of people don't realize that already now, half of consumer spending is being made by the top 10% of earners. Like, yeah, we're already mostly there. There's a reason why Disneyland is becoming insanely expensive. It's because they've given up on normal people and they're just charging a ton of money to the really wealthy people who are still spending tons of money. It's happened. It has happened. So, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? Get a parcel of land. Get food stores. Get used to rice and beans. At least rice and beans is so freaking good. I think you don't like rice and beans, but I love rice and beans.
But yeah, I just am so shocked by the people who are like, AI can't do human work. And I'm like, I literally have already fired multiple teams because AI has replaced them. Like,
well, I mean, to be fair, there are some things where, we're still hiring specialists to deal with plumbing problems and
oh yeah, there are some things. And in regards to people who are like, well, AI can't do human motor control work really well, like walking around and stuff like that. That is true. And the main reason is, and I talk about this in the comments, it's because we're approaching it wrong.
But also, like, are you aware of what's going on with Optimus? Like, entire Tesla factories have been repurposed to building these humanoid robots that actually are pretty dexterous. It's just that they're not on the market yet.
But more broadly, the problem that we have here, and the problem that AI experts have here, is I have explained in other videos that the human brain, particularly the cerebral cortex, appears to operate like a collection of token predictors. And there's a lot of research on this. You can watch our episodes where we go over all that research. But what's really important to note is if the AIs we are using today arrived in an architectural convergence with our cerebral cortex, which it appears they had, they are naturally going to be bad at fine movement because that is not handled by our cerebral cortex. That is handled by our cerebellum, which is one, a completely separate organ practically, and two, architecturally entirely different. So what we're likely going to want to do for AI movement related stuff is either hard-coded direct pathways that ideas are sent from the cerebral cortex, like collection of token predictors, to these and then carried out automatically, which will likely be drawing from the works of companies like Boston Dynamics and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also just keep in mind, like, just like Tex here, for example, like his motor control, even our kids, like they're any parent who's gone through the process of teaching a kid or helping a kid develop fine motor control, like hold a pen or, type on a keyboard or draw, will understand that even for someone who has all the parts built in really well, it takes a long time to figure that out.
Yeah. Another thing is, I think people really miss the ball on this. They're dismissing OpenAI as just a text model or a text prediction model, which it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of like how larger AI systems work. So if you're talking about agents, these are things that can do emails, do phone calls, do coding, everything like that, like all of the advanced stuff, generate images when they want to, generate video when they want to. The core of their thought is always a text-based model. The text-based AI models are always the core brain of an AI because they are the least expensive way to send large amounts of information into the future of the AI, basically. And so this idea of, oh, that's just a text, like whatever, it's just a text model. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's like you see a company trying to get in the cutting edge of cars and think that cars are going to change the way that transportation works. And you go, they just make engines. It's just a simple engine. Like, all of the fancy stuff in your Ferrari is downstream from the engine, right? Everything an agent does is downstream from that simple text model. But anyway, this is a fun end to this episode that's going to attract some normal right-wing bait, right? All right, I'll get started on this. Yeah, because tomorrow's Leaflet. Oh, people don't know I will be on Leaflet's show tomorrow.
But you're going to run a different episode this morning. Tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm going to put this into the different episode.
Are you going to? Oh, okay. Oh, right.
Yeah, I'm going to be on Leaflet show tomorrow at so.
You mean today?
Today at 7 p.m. I think we're going to start. So you're going to get me at a completely different time zone, which will be fun. We'll see how that goes, but I'm looking for, it'll be my first time doing like live streaming with like a somebody's fan base interacting. And I don't know how I feel about that. I'm a little worried.
You did it a little bit when you had that debate with that guy.
Yeah, but I didn't have time to be reading the stream. I do it when we go on Ed Dutton's show. He does it, but like I don't care what Ed Dutton's audience they're just too different from our audience in my mind. Like,
so you're nervous about this one because you actually respect her audience, and that's the
like Ed Dutton's comment section was full of people trying to determine if you were a Jew or not by your nose shape, right? Like, I'm like, her audience isn't going to be that sophomoric.
Yeah, I don't think so. No, I imagine they're pretty cool. So fair enough.
Not that I don't like Ed Dutton. I like him. I like his content.
We love him. We love him. It's just
it does attract a certain like he's less. We're pretty big on our show about being like, if you're just like a generic racist, we don't want you here.
Well, no, like the Jew comments are very much like our kids, for example. Their go-to is poop jokes. Titan's a poopy head. Toasty's a poopy head. They use our Alexa smart devices to say poop, 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 poop. It's all poop jokes. And it's very reductive, and it's just their go-to. And it's like their little inside, this is I'm joking language. Yeah. And I feel like Jew comments online are like, that is like the adult version of poop jokes, where they're just like, Jews, 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 Jew, 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 Jew.
No, you're wrong.
Really?
There are people who make jokes like that. And for a while, jokes like that had become common. Okay. But now there's this genuine community online that's just like, my personality is I hate Jews. And I'm a generic racist, right? Like
some people are poly, some people just
if you constantly signal on your show, this is not for that audience. So like he does really high quality content. He just doesn't also regularly be like, oh, and if you just hate on Jews, I think you're stupid, right? Like obviously Jews have problems, which we've talked about in detail, but there's a difference between saying that and just being like complete crash out mode,
Yeah, which I think is hard for people because, for example, I think one of our top performing videos is like the Jewish IQ myth one. Oh. And of course, the people who freaking hate Jews were like, oh, this is gold. And then they were like, so betrayed. And then we lost all those subscribers. And then they were like, oh, they don't hate Israel. What's wrong with them? So, you can't win.
Well, I mean, I think you can win. I think this is actually something I was talking to you about today. But like we hold really weird religious beliefs that I think if they came out later or if we came to them later in our streaming career, would have been very disqualifying of us in conservative intellectual spaces.
Yeah.
But we led with them and we've been very consistent and logical about them in a way that I don't think people find them particularly off-putting in the same way that, because it's very interesting that like in our episode recently about Dev slash short Fat Otaku versus what's her name?
Oh, Shoe on Head.
Shoe on Head. That the right loves Shoe on Head and has mostly turned against short Fat Otaku. And short Fat Otaku has moved or stayed on the left in areas that seem odd to us. But Shoe on Head is fundamentally much more of a leftist than he is. And yet she's forgiven for it and he's not. I think it's because she started with the positions that she has that are discordant, and she focuses on them from a logical perspective.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Anyway, love you to death, Simone. The comments on today of the Shoe on Head video were fun. Doing really well.
Yeah. I'm glad that a lot of people like Shoe on Head. Seems like a lot of people really like what they call 90s era Democrats.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the White House now. What, like Elon, RFK, Trump, JD Vance? Who do you think these people are, right? Like, this is our party now, okay?
Yeah.
I don't know. As I pointed out, the Puritan, the faction on the right that's like, oh, we need to focus on like purity culture. We need to focus on extracting everything. We need to focus on all acting the same way. I point this out and I'll keep pointing it out. They ideologically have much closer with the leftist aligned Islamists than they have with any faction that holds power on the right. And they don't really have a place in the modern right and do have a place in the modern left. And they found it.
Yeah.
Right. Like they regularly sit down and talk with Islamists, right? Like they have a side and a place that already accepts them. There's like not even a reason, even from an and people are like, well, you could get their votes, and it's like unlikely, right? Like they're not a very they put out insane demands that like would hurt us, prevent our party from winning, but the left doesn't have any cost to meeting the demands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the left doesn't actually have to follow through with the things that it says or promises.
Yeah.
Nor do they need to be coherent or cross-achievable.
Well, yeah, because you can just keep blaming. When you have an external locus of control themed party, you can always blame someone else for things not working out and never take personal responsibility. And what's so interesting about the Trump administration right now is taking personal responsibility for very controversial things, very unpopular things, and not blaming other people. Not being like, well, so-and-so made me do it, or this is, it's just like, no, I'm going to do this. I'm sorry. It's a little bit tough. It's going to be a little bit tough for a little bit longer. This is going to be worth it in the long run. Even if you don't think so, I don't care because I think this is the best. And that's a very different kind of, he's playing his music. Wow, Tex. Yeah. Texas Tunes. Tune Master.
Tex, look at the phone. Look at the